This is the ERP Advisor.
Today's episode, a definitive guide to Cloud ERP deployment.
Thank you everyone for joining us for today's CPE webinar, a definitive guide to Cloud ERP deployment. In this CPE presentation, we will discuss the benefits and pitfalls of the various cloud deployments available in the market. The following learning objectives for this presentation include the understanding of the following: what Cloud ERP is and how it differs from on-premise ERP, the different types of cloud ERP deployments, hosted, private cloud, public cloud, single tenant, multi-tenant, benefits of cloud ERP deployments, how cloud ERP impacts an organization's security, connectivity, remote accessibility, integration platform, data ownership, customization, and scenarios for when to use cloud ERP versus on-premise ERP. Today's presentation is valid for 1 CPE credit. In order to receive CPE credit, each attendee is required to attend the full 50-minute presentation, as well as engage and answer all of the polling questions asked throughout the presentation. If you are needing CPE credit for today's presentation, please leave your name in the chat of this Zoom, or please send an email to Juliette, JULIETTE, at erpadvisorsgroup.com. To help keep record, and then you will be issued a certificate for CPE. At the end of today's presentation, there will be a short question and answer period. If you have a question for our presenter, please add it to the chat section of this Zoom. Shawn Windle is our presenter for today. Shawn is the founder and managing principal of ERP Advisors Group based in Denver, Colorado. Shawn has worked in the enterprise software industry for over 20 years. He started his career at Accenture and Arthur Andersen Business Consulting and moved to the software industry with Oracle as a technology product manager. There are only a few people in the world with the practical software experience that Shawn has gained, with helping hundreds of clients across many industries with selecting and implementing a wide variety of enterprise solutions. His podcast, The ERP Advisor, has dozens of episodes with thousands of downloads and is featured on prominent podcast platforms such as Apple and Spotify. Shawn, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. If you're ready, I'll pass it over to you for the presentation today.
Okay, perfect. So I'll start off with a little bit about ERP Advisors Group. Is the sound okay, by the way? Everything's good? Good. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so our firm is called ERP Advisors Group, and we do ERP advising. I'm going to try to do everything possible to make this presentation light, because I have a feeling within like 3 minutes of talking about cloud ERP, everybody's going to fall asleep. So get ready. So we're going to make this pretty interesting and very apropos as well. I see we actually even have some clients on the call that we've selected some cloud software with, and other folks that are interested in cloud software. So we're going to have a really, really good presentation. And basically, that's really who we are as a firm, right? We're independent, we're unbiased, we're objective. Most of us came from a big 4 background, big 3 background. So we've worked with the large organizations, but what we really love is helping sort of the mid-sized folks out there to get through these really, really tough decisions. So we're going to talk a lot about sort of cloud and kind of what to do, but know that it comes from a point of help, that we're not trying to sell you anything. We don't sell anything except for our services. We don't sell any software solutions. We work with everybody. But again, really focused on helping mid-sized organizations throughout the country and the world. So with that, let's do it. So on our next slide here, first off, I do want to start off with why we're talking about this topic. What is cloud ERP? So actually, Rebecca, can you go to the title, or I think it was the second slide, the one where it shows the cloud in the data center? I love that picture. That is so cool. That's such a cool picture, right? I think maybe Thomas put that together. We found it, but cloud is cloud, and specifically, let's break them apart. We got cloud and we got ERP. That's actually what I used to think would be, oh, there's cloud. It's a cloud. Where's the cloud? Oh, it's in the data center. Well, there's a cloud in the data center. So that's why that picture is so funny, because that's kind of what you would think, right? We can go back to that last slide there on what is cloud ERP. That's not what cloud ERP is. It's actually enterprise resource planning software that's accessible over the internet. That's a really simple way to think about it, right? And we're really going to try to break these topics down in a way that is super, super easy. So if you do have questions or you want to get more sophisticated with that, write down your questions. Juliet will help me to track those, and then we'll answer them at the end for sure. But we're going to keep this super simple. So the other key point here is that actually kind of like that picture even is ERP is software. I think we're all pretty comfortable with what software is, right? I always think about it. It's like a little mini mind, basically, that takes information in, does some calculations with it, and bing, spits something out, right? It could be a pick slip in a warehouse. It could be financial statements or whatever. But software is sort of this code, right, that somebody writes and then it performs an action. But that software has to run on hardware. It's hardware that makes the software work. And that hardware, when you buy a cloud ERP, there's no hardware. Oh, that's not true, right? There's definitely hardware. You don't have to maintain it. That's the big difference, right? It's hosted. The software is hosted in a provider's cloud computing platform. So the hardware is usually in a data center that sits somewhere throughout the world for sure. But the interesting thing is, if you ever want to have a good time, excuse me, you can ask your software vendor, so what data center is my software in? First off, if it's a salesperson, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. I have to get in my little digs to the software guys, sales guys, just kidding. But seriously, they will say, oh yeah, it's in the data center. Great, I want to go see it. They'll say, you can't. And you might be like, wait, what? It's like having strange custody of your children. Like, you have children, but you can't go see them, right? That's kind of what it's like with cloud software. You really can't go see the server because there's security risks behind it, which is kind of interesting. So that's why we say it's hosted on a provider's cloud computing platform, which is someplace, but just know it's not up in the sky, right? It's in a data center in Kansas City or something, or wherever it may be. And then cloud ERP is typically delivered as a service, like software as a service or software as a service ERP, that big SAA, lowercase a, lowercase, big S ERP. So cloud ERP, it sits in a provider's cloud platform. It's accessible over the net. Super, super, super simple definition, basically, of what cloud ERP is. Now, we're going to go into a lot more details here, I think, on this next slide. So why do organizations want cloud ERP? I'm thinking of my Father's Day gift where anymore between my wife and I, we just like say, here's what I want for this holiday, right? And then we actually kind of buy it ourselves. And then the other person maybe opens the package and wraps it, maybe not. But I wanted a couple knives this year. And so I'm thinking of one of my clients that is a knife manufacturer who just went to cloud ERP. And I think about each one of these functions with that company, as well as many, many, many others that we're working with now or will work with in the future. And all of these benefits are really key. I think these are the first 7. I think there's a couple more on the next slide, but let me just talk about each one of these at a super high level, just so we understand what it is. The first one is probably the most important one, lower cost. Now, yeah, we'll get into more detail on these in a minute here, but the lower cost option is over the life of the software and across all of the functions, all of the things that are needed to run the software solution. So the simplest thing to think about here is, if we have an application that's in the cloud, right? We know, like we just talked about, that there's hardware that still has to support the software. Well, guess what? Who has to support that software? That hardware, pardon me. If it's not cloud and the solution is on premise, in your premise, meaning in your office or someplace, somebody still has to support the software or the hardware. Man, I'm going to get confused. I hope you guys aren't. So there is a server that sits somewhere. Now, if we do a cloud deployment, are we responsible for the server? The answer is no, the software provider is. And over time, we don't have to hire somebody who knows HP systems, blades, right? The actual bare metal machines. We don't have to hire somebody who knows the database and the database administrator. We don't have to hire somebody who knows the application servers. We don't have to hire somebody that knows the underlying technology platform of the product. Let's say it's JD Edwards. We don't need to have a JD Edwards tools person because it all sits in the cloud, right? So the lower cost really comes from the avoided cost of not having personnel to support these products. It's specifically the technology platform. Fast and flexible implementation. So we can deploy software to the cloud faster versus having to set up the environment and then put everything in place. The database, I can remember implementations that would take, a couple months to just get the actual environment set up, and then you can actually do the implementation. The cloud-based ERP vendors can spin up an instance in a matter of hours, literally. Business improvements is interesting because now we're really focusing more on kind of why we're buying the software, which is we want to shorten that AP approval process time or whatever. So we can get more business improvements in a shorter amount of time, simplicity and automation, new functionality, better insight, support for mobile ERP. You start to get the sense here that it's like, this really does simplify the deployment of enterprise software that if you've just implemented in the last 5 to 10 years, one of these tier 2 ERPs, a medium size or smaller one, you don't even think about what it was like when I remember, in the 90s implementing even a basic system, and it was a big effort. And all of these points were harder to come by when you had sort of the on-premise solutions only. I think the next page has a few more, is that right? Let's go on to the next slide when you're ready here. No, I think you're actually going to get into difference. Good. So I think that's the 7 benefits, which is perfect. Now, how does cloud ERP differ from on-premise ERP? So the big thing, the big thing here is we have some clients that actually do want on-premise, and we have other clients that want cloud. So does that mean that cloud is always the right answer? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Pretty obvious, right? But customers do not own the software when it's in the cloud, right? They lease it or subscribe to it on an annual basis, or maybe there's a monthly subscription basis. So they're paying for it on a recurring basis. That's not the way it was with the perpetual license software of the days of yore. Some software vendors even have for multiple options. Acumatica, for instance, you can get an on-premise or in your private cloud. We'll talk about that. So it'd be a perpetual license versus a recurring. But the cloud ERP, though, it is sold on a recurring basis, whether it's annual, monthly, even quarterly. Some of the vendors have quarterly rates. There is no upfront hardware cost, and the vendor takes care of the environmental software, the application maintenance, data storage, security, and upgrades, right? So you're going to get upgraded when you're in the cloud for cloud ERP. And I bet there's some people on the call, if I still got you 15 minutes into this, that are like, oh my God, you can't force me to upgrade. What about all my changes they're going to break? Yep. We'll talk about that also, but you will get upgrades basically done for free when you're in the cloud. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So on this next slide here, we do want to kind of get your feedback. As you know, to get the CPE credit, we do need you to answer these questions here. So the first question is, what is cloud ERP? A new way to predict weather patterns. B, enterprise resource planning that is accessible over the internet. C, a solution for everything wrong with a company. D, the best ERP option for everybody, or all the above. So we'll give you a minute to go ahead and vote on that. And I think the poll question just popped up there, so you can just put your answer in there. We're down in Florida, and man, it is hot. I got to turn up the air conditioner here. with my cloud-based thermostat, which is crazy. Okay, maybe another 30 seconds there. Good. Perfect. Okay, Rebecca, do we have the answers for that? That's right, it's B, enterprise resource planning that is accessible over the internet. Now, it's interesting because some people may say, well, we have an on-premise solution and it's accessible over the internet. And what they really mean is remote desktop. So this is truly, the concept that you're using a browser to get to the software that does sit someplace else, not on premise. Good. Okay, so I am going to, as we go through this, I'm going to give you some tips on some things that I have seen that sometimes the software sales guys and gals use to confuse you. So my job is to try to deconfuse these topics. So how Cloud ERP impacts different aspects of an organization, right? You'll often see marketing material from a cloud-based ERP solution, really any cloud-based software solution. It says, oh, we have better, enter the phrase in the blank, right? We have better security. We have better connectivity, remote accessibility. We have a better integration platform. We have better data ownership. We have better customization capabilities, right? We bring all these areas of your business together in one fell swoop. That's sort of the promise. Now, the reality is it's kind of true. There are some factors that, again, if you think about on-premise software versus cloud, where we can get to on-premise software, we can access it remotely, we can do integrations, right? We can do these things for sure. But the real benefit here of the Cloud ERP is that it's built with these concepts with them being first in mind. So I would say that it's more about the Cloud ERP solutions are typically more modern than the applications that run just on premise. And so therefore, when they built these solutions, they've kept these concepts in mind right from the get-go. So let's break down what each one of these is here. We'll start with the next slide, I think, on security. So if you think about security today, actually, I'm pretty close to a company called Know-Before, and we usually do a call once a year with a great information security guy who always, I leave the call like freaking out. I'm like shaking because I'm so afraid for cybersecurity attacks, right? It's really scary what's going on out there. We've had several clients get hit and have had to pay ransomware and have had to go through rebuilding servers and having their business shut down because their legacy systems were hit. So security is really top of mind, and it should be, right? Not just by cybersecurity people trying to sell you cybersecurity services, but because we all do have a fiduciary duty to ensure that our organizations are protected. So one of the benefits of Cloud ERP is that the security is kind of built into that specific application anyway. You'll have other apps that you run across your business, but at least that one's going to have really strong security. So the degree of security that your system has depends on how it's deployed and who manages it, right? So if you have somebody that is an administrator for your system who gives out passwords or sets up phantom users, well, okay, that's going to be an issue. So it's not like the risk of security vulnerability goes away with Cloud ERP, but it's a lot easier to sort of track it down. I remember a presentation that Larry Ellison put on, and he was talking about their enterprise applications at Oracle. And he said, you can't even imagine the amount of attacks that we get in a day, a week, a month, a year, even in a minute. And that they have bots basically that protect their enterprise applications from all of these other bad bots, whatever they're called, bad robots, that are literally trying to attack these enterprise applications that are in the cloud. So, if you think about the degree of security that Oracle is able to bring for their customers, it's significantly higher than any of our individual customers can on their own. So, when you've got a cloud ERP that's managed by Microsoft, that's managed by even an organization that's maybe smaller, say DCOM or Epicor is pretty big, right? But these organizations have security experts that are out there making sure that your assets are taken care of. But what is common also, though, is it's not just about attacking the system, right? But actually about taking data, right? So it's more common to find that stolen data was stored on a company's on-premise, basically, than in the cloud. So a lot of these cybersecurity attacks where there's ransomware, the malicious, really the criminals, they're criminals. They'll basically threaten and even just do it, that they will publish your data unless you pay them $1 million. And not only do they screw up your systems, but they pull this data out and then they will publish it on the dark web or someplace. They'll put your customers lists up or whatever. So it's horrific. So usually what happens, what's more common when the data gets stolen, and it is from on-premise applications. So it's a big issue. Now, there is also the risk from a security perspective of data loss. So with Cloud ERP, the infrastructure providers have offsite backups done regularly and redundantly. So you may have heard the term business continuity planning, and the Cloud ERP providers have that plan nailed, like dialed in. Of course, I'm thinking of one vendor who was testing, actually, it was funny, it was 2 years ago, they were testing their failover. And it was supposed to be a test. This is only a test. Well, actually, they actually did kill their data center. It stopped, like the data center stopped, right? And customers couldn't get access to their systems for hours and hours in the middle of this test because the test was actually real, it turned out. And it was a mess, but they got it cleaned up. But you can imagine, again, you have a whole team that's put in place to make sure that the disaster recovery plan is there. And a lot of these organizations don't just have failover sites within the data center. They'll have a failover site to a completely different data center, even someplace different in the country or around the world. So security is a big deal. That's the key point there. Now, connectivity and accessibility. This is a real benefit for Cloud ERP, especially for our clients that have distributed workforces, which is everybody now. But even before, if you think about field services organizations or folks that have salespeople out in the field or whatever it is, getting access, appropriate access with a user ID and password to the Cloud ERP is a lot easier than having to remote desktop in or Citrix in. Some of you guys on the call might even have to do those things today to get to your ERP, whereas the Cloud ERP, you can actually just access it pretty much anywhere, right, with the right authentications. And then the applications over the cloud, they work in an open environment, which increases accessibility options. So not only can our people get to it, but other applications that we need to get to it will integrate. So, it's sort of like having, blue sky access to your Cloud ERP. That's enough on that slide. Let's go to the next one. Good. A couple other areas. I just mentioned this actually on integration platform. So when ERP applications are in the cloud, they're easier to implement with, or they're easier to integrate with other cloud services. So say an ERP cloud integration with the tax service. It's pretty straightforward. They're based on those applications, build their integrations on the same types of protocols, very open protocols, but again, very secure protocols, so that we can pull in information automatically into your ERP, right? If you have an e-commerce integration, right, it can flow very seamlessly between applications. So that's a real nice benefit for sure. And due to the nature of ERP systems, which connect with different parties inside and outside the enterprise, integration with other services just becomes a lot easier than it was before. So we would have to establish connection with external systems, Then we'd have to do the security and test the protocols, then be able to send data over in a format that was expected, receive it, confirm that it got received, calculate it, get the data, tell we're going to send it back, confirm that we got it, confirm that that's the right security, and then send back a confirmation that we got it, right? There's a lot of steps to building out those integrations that a lot of the cloud ERPs kind of do for free. A lot of that functionality is included in there. Then there's also data ownership. Now, this is an important one because when you think about it, if you think about an organization that has had an on-premise solution for a long time, it's a lot of our clients, and they go to a cloud solution, right? They may be feeling like, well, I can never get out of this thing. And, you know, that's what the private equity companies are kind of planning on, right? That's where those big recurring revenue streams come in. But you always own your data. The data is yours. You can do whatever you want to do with the data. Now, good luck getting it out sometimes. A lot of the vendors have tools where you can extract your data when it's time for you to move on to another software solution. But it is something in the, the diligence process when you're looking at new solutions that you really need to look at. And frankly, here's a tip for you for sure. Make sure in the contract it says that you will have ample time to pull your data out of the solution, maybe even after the contract ends. So if you think about it, it's a little bit like pay for access, right? So I pay for the software for 12 months. Okay, good. The cloud ERP. Now I get to the end, maybe 9 months in, I'm like, you know what? This app's not going to work. I should have hired ERP advisors, right? Or those that have. I pray that it will still work for you and will do everything in my power to ensure it will. But let's say worst case scenario, 9 months and you're like, okay, I got to get out of this thing. Great. So you have to then figure out what other solution you're going to go to. You got to figure out who's going to implement it. You got to go through a whole process basically to do all this stuff. And let's say you figure it out month 11. Like, great, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to assign this solution with this software solution. It's going to start month 13 because you don't want to overlap them because you want to watch the fees. This is the wrong way to do it. So month 13, I start the new software and I'm going to have the implementation start and then pull my data as soon as they start. And we're going to go on and everything's going to be fine. Good. Month 12 comes, you didn't pay your bill and the cloud ERP vendor shuts you off. Theoretically, they can do that. You're not paying for the access. You don't get the access. It's like shutting down a cable service for TV or something. Now, the reality is most of the vendors will work with you. They're definitely still going to charge you, but they may put you on a month-by-month contract. But the better thing to do, right, is to say, okay, we're going to switch. It's hopefully month 6. Give yourself a little bit of time, right, to figure out which vendor you're going to go to. It's month 7 and 8. Spin up the new solution. So yes, you're paying for 2 at the same time, but now you can start extracting your data out of the old one and putting it into the new one, right? It's like moving, except when you move, usually you can time it where you close on the old house and you close on the new house pretty close to the same day. Very rarely is that going to happen though with enterprise software because the new house basically you still have to construct it, right? So you've got to overlap those so that you can pull the data from your old system into your new system. So just be really aware that there's some vulnerability that you have around that data being in the cloud ERP. Know you still own it for sure, but that when you're in the cloud, when you want to switch from cloud to cloud, it's going to take a lot more than just a little, angel wing hop. You actually got to think through it and almost do a ladder from one cloud into the other so that you can make sure to bring your data back and forth. I'm just going to try to do some analogies. They haven't gone so well so far. So let's try the next page though. Good. Customization. Okay. Let me think here. We probably have about 6 clients that we're working with right now with what we call the needs analysis, which is helping them figure out what they really, really need for software. And every single one, except for one of those clients has said, all I know is when we go to a new solution, we do not want to customize. And I always sort of have to say, yes, that's right. We don't want to customize. But, the realities are you're going to. There's always a little bit, even if it's a tweak of just some of the simple business rules, or maybe it's build a process automation or a workflow that's specific to you. So it's going to happen. And the beauty, though, of the way that the cloud ERP solutions are architected, so they're built so that you can, what's the phrases you'll hear? You can extend, you can personalize, right? You're really customizing these apps. But the key thing is that you're not customizing code that's so far down in the tech stack that when they upgrade, it blows your customizations away, right? That's the difference, is that the technology platforms are very elastic. So you can scale up with customizations, or even bring them down according to the needs that you have, in a pretty easy way. And I'm talking about customization of functionality, basically. But you can also customize around the size of your technology stack, because sometimes some organizations need more computing power because they have a ton more transactions than other organizations. And that's important because it is one of the requirements that you really don't think about. Well, sure, the cloud ERP can support me technically because they support much bigger customers than me. Okay, well, we had a client that was maybe about 40 million in revenue, but every time they made a sale to a big box store, each time it was a different sales order and invoice. And it was a nightmare, the amount of transactions that they had. So we had to make sure that the software solution could scale with it, which fortunately it could, because it was an ERP in the cloud. I'm thinking I covered the other parts on this. So let's go to the next question. So true or false? Cloud ERP can significantly help remote accessibility for businesses. So true or false? Perfect. We'll give a minute here to respond. Good. Okay, perfect. I think we've registered your answers, which is good. Let's find out what the answer is. The answer is true. Exactly. So it definitely helps with remote accessibility for sure. Good. Okay. Now, let's sort of change the topic a little bit here. Those were some of the key benefits, but now let's get into something that could really bore you to death if you're not already there. But hopefully I'll try to make this interesting. Because how do I say this? This stuff is really hard. Like we really try to make this easy for our clients. But this area, oh yeah, we're cloud-based. I literally used to have more hair like in this part of my head, and I think I ripped it out on a call because I was like, oh my God, what are you trying to say? I don't even understand what you're trying to say, vendor. And I do this for a living. Like, what is really going on? So the key thing to remember is every cloud deployment is not the same. So you'll see vendors say, oh yeah, we're cloud-based. We were made for the cloud. We were made in the cloud, like some kind of angel thing or whatever. You can't not think of that. But we do cloud deployments. We do this, like, oh my gosh, okay, that's good. But listen, I'm sorry to say this, and I'm sure that's why you're attending this call and you're still in halfway through, is that you have some responsibility to understand what that really means, right? It's not like buying toothpaste that's pretty standardized, right? We're buying enterprise software that's pretty complex. And the reality is there are many different types of deployments. Now, here's 5 of them, and we're going to talk about 5 of them today. I bet there's more. If you've heard of others, put them in the chat, and I'll do the best I can to answer them here. I'm at the end, or if I don't know, I'll research it and get back to you. But it's really good that you understand what these 5 are for sure. So let's break them down here, starting on the next slide. So hosted deployment. Okay, so this is where you own the software, but somebody else has the hardware. So you don't have the hardware investment. So you've gone to a company like, I don't even know if they're in business anymore. I just thought about this, but hosting.com used to be somebody who did this. But maybe it's a rack space or it's a data center, but you buy the software and then you decide to put it somewhere with somebody who hosts it for you, which basically again means they have the hardware, and then usually the environmental software too that needs to be in place for you to run your ERP. So usually you will access that software through something called terminal services or Microsoft's RDP, remote desktop platform, I think is the P. But basically you have a little program that you run that you put in an IP address that goes out and finds it, checks that you have access to it, user ID, password, and now you're accessing it. You're basically running the desktop on the hosted, in the hosted environment. You're not running it on yours. You're running the software that allows you to run the solution from wherever it exists. So the benefit there is that those organizations are protecting the actual server where your software sits, so your data is secure. They can do availability and sort of redundancy kind of events if there's a disaster. You can get backups. So at least you don't have to have the hardware problem that you would, of course, if you had it on premise. So that's sort of the first gradient, which is you buy the software or you get a perpetual license to it, and then you just put it somewhere where somebody else is responsible for it. But here's the thing is, you are actually still responsible for updating the environmental software, making sure the app itself is updated, doing the upgrades, making sure that if a user has an issue that, you got to help them with that, right? It's not like the rack space or somebody else is going to be able to help you with that problem. So it's sort of like taking your kid over to grandma's. There's a good way to say it. It's still your kid. Maybe she takes care of a little bit of the kiddo, but then when there's a problem, whoop, she brings the kiddo back to you. Something like that, basically. Good. Let's go to the next deployment. So I did, that's right. We did want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the scenarios that make sense to do these kinds of deployments in. And this is an example, just to give you an idea of why a client is doing this hosted model today. So we have a client that's a contract manufacturer, and they don't want the software to run on their premise. They know they're not going to back it up. They know there's a sprinkler above the server in the server room. That's always fun. They know that they don't know what the cooling has to be. I mean, our office this weekend, it was so hot in Colorado that we had some things on the wall that fell down. They were stuck up to the wall and they literally fell. It was so hot. What's your server going to do if your landlord decides to turn off the AC for the weekend? By the way, if you have a server in your office, make sure the landlord doesn't turn off the AC on the weekend. You're going to have to pay for that, or put it, someplace that hosts it. So this particular company said, no way, I don't want that problem. I want to put it up with a provider who's going to take care of my ERP, at least the hardware side of it, and make sure that it's maintained. Makes perfect sense for them. By the way, they're on an old legacy system that they customized the crap out of, and now they can't switch. So there you go. Good. Now, let's go to the next level. So benefits and disadvantages of private cloud deployment, which is pretty similar to what a hosting environment is, but you basically have kind of a one-on-one environment for a single customer. So when you think about this, you may be so big and have so many applications that you run. Some of our engineering firms are this way, or other kinds of organizations have tons and tons of applications. They'll set up basically their own private cloud, usually within a data center provider again, right? So, but that hardware that they have there, it's theirs. They don't have to share the hardware with anybody. They own it, they could lease it, but it's sort of their own kind of a private deployment. If you think about this, the access even to the area within the data center itself, you can still have your people come, but it's usually caged off, right? So it literally is like taking a cloud and kind of making it your own, right? And in this case, you get really good control. There's good security and privacy, and we can support legacy solutions because a lot of these things don't go away. So that's a good way to go ahead and put up a solution that, again, kind of sits someplace where it's not just in a data center. You actually set it up where you've got your own space and really your own kind of piece of the cloud that's dedicated to you. So I think a scenario on this one, actually, we're going to talk about the public cloud first, then we're going to talk about another scenario. So that was private. So now if you go to the next slide, good. Public cloud deployment. So when you think about public cloud, you can think about Amazon Web Services, AWS, or Azure, right? Where there's sort of these, data centers. We have clients that are data centers, and we have clients that build data centers. And you think about just tons and tons and tons and tons of real estate in the US and really the world, where they basically have buildings with a bunch of machines in them. Like if you think about Amazon Web Services or AWS, again, we don't know where those data centers are. Actually, we do know where some of them are, but we don't know what buildings, what floors, what areas, what racks, right? It kind of doesn't matter because it's sort of this concept of public cloud. Of course, it's still secure and it's segmented off for you so nobody else can get to it. But the real benefit of this is that not only can others access it with the correct credentials, but you can scale it like significantly. Like you can 4x if you need more computing power with literally by going on to like a configuration menu on a website and change from 1x to 4x and there you go. All of a sudden you have this computing power. And some of our clients have that need, even for holidays. If you think about, big periods of demand, sometimes you have to spin up a lot of hardware. Well, you just do it literally that fast in a public cloud deployment, which is good. There's minimal investment. The setup costs are usually, there's usually some, but you can negotiate on that because they want the recurring revenue, of course, of that long-term relationship. So now I think we're going to talk about a scenario. So we worked with an organization that uses a private cloud sort of ERP deployment. And the reason why was to increase their security and decrease the risk to customer data. So they felt like they could go into the public cloud and again, make sure that those guardrails are up, that the walls are set between their data and others. But again, they could scale very quickly as they were going through a lot of growth. So there you go, right? So there isn't really one answer. It's kind of what we're trying to get to on these different deployments, but that gives you an idea of private cloud. Whew, okay, that's it, right? Nope, there's more. So, good. Now you may hear this term, single tenant deployment. Actually, I don't think you ever will. Now that I think about it, this is a real tricky one because a lot of ERP vendors are actually doing this. So they'll work with AWS or with Azure, especially if they're a Microsoft partner. And what they'll do is when you subscribe to the service, formerly known as a software, when you buy the software, let's just say that, right? And you say, okay, start. And they provision an instance of the solution for you. What they're actually doing is they are setting up a single instance that runs on shared environmental software. So we call that a single tenant, right? That runs across, maybe it's the same database server, the same app server, whatever. So all the customer data and interactions are separate from every other customer because you basically have your own sort of sliver and really even logical kind of breakdown of your instance and what all your data looks like. So customer data is not housed in the same database. There's no sharing of data in any way. So you have your own database server But again, we maintain SQL Server, which is Windows database environment. So we'll maintain that, but we'll give you your own instance of SQL Server for this customer, own instance for that customer, own instance for that customer. So the benefits are, oh God, and I'm thinking of on the next slide how I'm just going to start crying on an issue we just had recently, which is good to talk about. But the benefits in this area is that your customer data truly is isolated from other data sources where you really are in different instances, and it's impossible to get access to that for sure. Your customizations are put in your own instance for sure, no problem. And the other thing is that it's a lot easier. You can even go down and grab the database and pull it out. Basically, if you have access, especially at the end of your contract, because that data is so segmented and so separate, easier to get to for sure. Now, some disadvantages is somebody still has to run and maintain your database server, your app server, your instances of those all have to be maintained independently of everybody else's. So someone still has to do that effort. Again, the enterprise resource planning software vendors, they won't tell you that they have to do all that. They'll just do it. But again, we're trying to build our responsibility. We're trying to be big boys and big girls about what we're buying. You do need to know, like Infor is like this, where all of those environmental applications, they're maintaining those on your behalf. You're paying for them. And if they go down, they're going to fix them, but you just need to understand that they're out there. So it is a complex setup. There is complex management. Again, the vendor should be able to take care of that. And it can even be a little bit higher cost in terms of running, because from the software vendor's perspective, they have all of these little, again, single instances out there that they have to maintain. So that's some of the benefits and disadvantages. Let's go to the multi-tenant deployment. So in a multi-tenant world, customers cannot see each other's data still, of course, right? But they do live in the same database. So what separates them is not the physical barrier of a separate database instance. It's actually the software and the security that sits in that database that says, if you're this client, then you only have access to this data in this database. So it's not segmented in the same way physically or as the single tenant, but the benefits are, man, like a NetSuite can spin up your instance. We spend all this time and energy and effort negotiating contracts, finding requirements, doing all this diligence. And like, okay, sign here. So you sign here, and then whoop, NetSuite's like, okay, here you go. Here's your instance. You're like, oh my God, how did you set that up so fast, right? Well, because it's really easy to deploy multi-tenant software. Okay, great. So that's good. It still has to be set up and configured, though. Don't forget that, right? Definitely efficient resource usage because you are maximizing servers, you're maximizing all the software. There's reduced costs for the people that maintain these things. They may pass those costs on to you, they may not. There is a greater security risk, and there is a little bit of a lack of cost visibility. It's harder to separate the cost for the providers, right? They just see big instances sitting out there. I will tell you this, that we did have a client recently, and I'm not going to say who the vendor is, even though I want to, but I'm not going to. And they have a multi-tenant deployment. And one of our database guys was cranking away, and he's running some queries, and he starts to see some really, really, really weird data. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it turns out it was somebody else's data. So here's the thing. The reason why I'm doing this presentation is because you really do have the responsibility to figure out how secure, how stable, how mature are these hosted or cloud deployments with the ERP vendors, because if they're not, some mistakes can still happen. So let's go to a couple questions here, and I think we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes. So on this next slide here, which option is the best cloud deployment model? Hosted, private cloud, multi-tenant, or none of the above? Which one is the best? Give you a minute to answer that. Good. I think we got some answers coming in here. Perfect. Okay, Rebecca, let's go to the answer on this one. It's a little trick question, right? None of the above. The requirements business by business. So there's not a definitive winner for sure. But what matters more is that you know what you're getting into. I think there's a G.I. Joe movie coming out, and I was in some meeting or whatever, and they said, do you remember what they used to say on G.I. Joe? And like four of us said, knowing is half the battle, because it's like pounded into our head from G.I. Joe. Knowing is half the battle with cloud deployments. Good. I want to do just a couple other things here real fast here. So the next scenario on the next slide here, this is a good point because it does show when the multi-tenant sort of deployment makes a ton of sense. And it makes a ton of sense in a lot of scenarios, but this is super simple, that we have an organization that's pretty new and they need to get set up fast, right? And they're moving fast because everybody's moving fast when you're a startup, apparently, and your private equity needs you to get returns right now, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, going with a multi-tenant solution can make a ton of sense because literally Salesforce, these instances can be stood up in a matter of minutes, it seems like. And you do have just that centralized database that the entire organization has. So because that cloud deployment, everybody can get to it. Lots of business functionality in there and everything. So it's a basic scenario where we do see a lot of startups that go towards those deployments for that reason. I think the next question is our last question here. Yep. So which one is right, cloud or on-premise? An organization, so this is a scenario for you now, an organization does not have an IT department that can regulate their ERP requirements, including regular maintenance. Which one do you think that company should look towards, cloud or on-premise? The right answer is always it depends, but let's just keep this one simple, folks. Cloud or on-premise? Give you a couple seconds on that. Good. All right, Rebecca, the answer is cloud. Absolutely. Yeah, we have almost all of our clients are like, I don't want that risk. I have enough risk. Please, let's get something in the cloud, and it makes a ton of sense. So now I'll just summarize here over the next couple minutes, and then Juliet, I can pass the ball back to you here if there's some questions or not. We can wrap, but let me just summarize what we've talked about here, because there's been a lot of stuff, and I was trying to make it more entertaining than I was, but this was hard to talk about. Just remember, Cloud ERP does offer benefits, right? Such as lower cost, fast, flexible implementations, mobile support, or support for mobile accessibility, right? Access to newer technology, et cetera. It's easier to spin in new technology when your servers and your instance of the code sits over here. You can whoop, drop something in. Some of the vendors are doing updates every week. And they don't even tell you because you don't need to know, right? But you're getting access to more and more functionality, which is actually good. There are impacts that you do need to think about, right? There is security, connectivity, remote accessibility, integration platform, data ownership, and customization. We talked about each one of those points, and you really do need to keep those in mind when you're evaluating solutions to say, hey, what are the key points that we really need to make sure that we cover there? And you can go back and listen to this presentation for more details on those too, if you didn't catch them the first time. The next slide here on summary. Remember, there are different types of deployments. So don't just say, are you cloud or not, right? You have to say, what type of deployment do you have if you're cloud? And the vendors will tell you. They're all very upfront and honest about this. But I will say, as our clients will tell you, who some of them are on this call, that we always do a technology due diligence meeting with the tech specialist at the software vendors. And we're talking about people that all they do is the technology side. And they'll usually have a presentation where they can talk through what their cloud deployment looks like, but ask these questions so that you know what you're getting into. And remember, none of them are necessarily good or bad. It depends on kind of what your needs are. But the more important thing, I think, though, is as you're going through these topics, if you need help, if anything seems confusing, which I hopefully helped a little bit make it a little less confusing that at least the cloud's not like literally a cloud in the data center like the picture was at the beginning. Don't think that, right? But hopefully this will help you to get some good ideas. Let us know if you need anything. We're online, super easy to get to us anytime. Juliet knows everything. She's the way to get to me. If you really want to talk to me, talk to Juliet first. But we'd love to help you guys out if you have any questions on that. So Juliet, I'll pass it back to you after you unmute.
Okay, perfect. So I don't see any questions that have come through, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to email them to me. I'll get them to Shawn and we'll get you an answer. We're happy to help in any way we can. So thank you, Shawn, for sharing such great information. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us for our CPE webinar today. If you would like a copy of the deck from today's presentation, please email me, let me know, and I will be sure to get that to you. And again, if you need CPE credit for today's presentation and you answered each of the polling questions, please send an email to me, Juliet at erpadvisorsgroup.com. Be sure to join us for our next webinar scheduled for June 23rd, an all-out breakdown of Acumatica. Shawn will discuss all the features the Acumatica software platform has to offer. Please go to our website, erpadvisorsgroup.com, for more details and to register. ERP Advisors Group is one of the country's top independent enterprise software advisory firms. ERP Advisors Group advises mid to large-sized businesses on selecting and implementing business applications from enterprise resource planning, customer relationship management, human capital management, business intelligence, and other enterprise applications, which equates to millions of dollars in software deals each year across many industries. Thank you again for joining us today.